All right. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we discuss the principles behind the plans. My name is Dave.
Yeah, and my name is Jeff, and of course, we're both on staff at Allison Park Church. I'm the lead pastor here. Dave's campus pastor at the Northside campus. We're a multi-campus church in Western PA, and we're glad you joined us today.
Absolutely, yeah. And we just want to say thank you to our regular listeners who are joining us again. Thanks for being a part of our show. You really make this special. No new gratitudes today as far as 5-star reviews, but one thing we always love to do, and we would just love if you would do this for us. If you can go on your phone and leave us a 5-star review either on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, we would love to shout you out specifically. And again, if you like the content and you're on YouTube, we would love it if you subscribe to this channel. Like the video, share it, just helps us get the word out.
And I've been traveling a little bit over the last couple of months to different pastors' events around the country and speaking in different places. And I have heard from some people who just walk up and say, "Hey, I love the podcast," or you'll tell me, "Man, I love that particular episode." So we just really like the fact that we get to be part of your world, that you are engaging with us, that we're talking about things that you're curious about, and any way that you want to communicate with us at all about future things you're interested in hearing us address, we would love to hear from you in any way possible. So thanks for the shout outs in all those various ways.
And thanks for being a part of our journey with this.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to be jumping into a brand new episode today, tentatively titled Criticism, Blind Spots, and How to Walk in Truth.
Yeah.
And we'll tease this because you wanted to tease this. We had to start over our last one because it didn't go so hot. But we've been looking for an alien type episode. So if you've ever been curious, there's a weird part of Genesis in chapter 6 where it talks about these people called the Nephilim that have a lot of controversial backgrounds.
Yeah. In case you're wondering what the aliens thing is, so we've been on heavy topics. And we have done some lighter episodes. We actually did 2 on are there aliens and what would that mean for Christianity. And we've talked about lighter things like we had a whole episode on weed, marijuana, CBD, what's good and bad with all of that. So we were searching for something that isn't as heavy as what does the Bible say about hell? And so we've come up with one within the next couple episodes. We're going to talk about, are the Nephilim half demon, half people, or is there some other explanation in Genesis chapter 6?
Yeah, if you're listening though, you're probably used to the heavy material because that's
what we do.
That's what we do. It's how we talk in general.
Yeah.
The thing is, heavy content feels light to me a lot of times. Like last time we were like talking about violence in movies and video games, and you're like, that was kind of heavy, and I was like, oh, it just felt normal to me.
Well, good. Because, I actually think that there aren't enough formats where we can talk about stuff like this. So even the heavy topics, hopefully we don't leave you feeling heavy over it, but we've just dove into the middle of something robust, right?
Well,
so
speaking of feeling heavy, I think, this conversation came from, we were having a conversation with the family, and one of our family members was talking about how they recently had to deal with a lot of criticism. And the question that was sort of starting this conversation that leads to this topic is, how do you deal with or sort through truth that maybe could be helpful that comes in the form of criticism? And often when criticism comes, it comes like, in a sharp edge, and it doesn't feel good, but there might be some stuff that we could learn from in there, maybe. So should we, is all criticism true? Is there always something to learn from it?
So let's talk about who might criticize. So if you're a leader and there are people following you, there are people that might not necessarily like how you lead something or the way things are in the organization that you're a part of or the department that you lead. So you might catch criticism that way. If you're married, you can catch criticism from your spouse or your in-laws or your family. It could be just random, like someone you work with and all of a sudden they turn toward you and they say something that is very directed at,
or your boss.
A flaw. Could be your boss. Yeah. Maybe you would see that as criticism, even if it's done in the context of a performance review. We call that constructive criticism. Everybody wants to think of it that way anyway. So we all face opinions about us. There's even self-criticism, right? We look in the mirror sometimes and we have opinions about ourselves. So how do you process criticism without So what can it do to you? Let me ask you that. When you're criticized, what's the effect emotionally? Let's talk there.
Yeah. Like, I think a lot of people, I think the natural response to criticism is defensiveness, sometimes frustration, sometimes it causes you to feel down or beat up, or, if it feels personal, you can have a rift relationally between you and the person that gave the criticism. And I do think that the reality is, I think for a lot of people, like, criticism is something that's difficult to deal with. But even for people that are good at taking criticism, if it's about the wrong thing, it's
about something you're already sensitive about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks. But here's the flip side, and this is where I think I'm interested in the conversation more than just dealing with it, because it's like, all right, I'm sure there's other stuff out there about how to deal with it. Here's where I'm interested. Something I've been doing a lot of thinking about is how easy it is for people in general, like for me, for you, for all of us, to have these major areas of blind spots. I'll pitch it like this. If you think about somebody you're close to and you're really analyzing them for a second, there are probably traits or negative qualities or habits or, patterns of behavior that, like, everybody else knows they have, and they're seemingly totally unaware that they do this thing. I'm not talking about, like, an annoying thing like biting your nails. I'm talking about, like, they tend to way overreact. They snap at people. They're constantly super late and don't seem to care if it affects people's schedules. They, when people are making decisions, they always have to have it their way, and they tend to be very self-centered or whatever. There's like a million things that it could be.
You think about people in particular?
No. No, I'm not. But I think I really am not thinking about anybody in particular. But I feel like there are things that it's like, this person has no idea. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, if somebody were to try to tell them, they would view it as unfair, deconstructive criticism or unconstructive criticism.
So this criticism talk about is how to receive it and how to give it.
How to receive it, how to give it, and then I think the end of it.
Do you really want it?
Yeah, how to walk in truth, because I think that probably me and you and all of our listeners, to some extent, have some blind spots that
I don't.
You might not.
I'm just kidding.
You've arrived.
We all do.
Yeah.
That's my blind spot. That I have blind spots.
I have no blind spots. If you think that's the first one to start there. And we can just remove that. Yeah. But I think all of us have that. And I think if we want to, the Bible talks about as Christians being conformed to the image of Christ. Some of that means having our own blind spots stripped away. And that's a painful process. Mm-hmm. So how to take and receive criticism, but then also how to walk in truth, because I think it's hard. I don't think we'll ever fully have be totally rid of blind spots, but we should be doing our best to grow and to learn and become more like Jesus. So yeah.
One of the things that I have said in the past, I don't know if this is original with me, one of the greatest gifts you can ever receive is an accurate perception of yourself. Mm. And when you have that, then you have the basis for real growth and improvement. When you don't have an accurate perception of yourself, then you end up trying to do things that maybe you shouldn't try to do. Maybe you're outside of your power spot. Maybe you're not working on the right things in your own personal growth and development. And so living in delusion is the opposite of living in truth. So how do we begin this? I can start with something very personal, but I don't want to take away you can set the agenda for the journey here in the conversation.
Yeah, start with something personal.
Okay,
if you're going too far.
When I first became the pastor 32 years ago at Allison Park Church, I was just barely 27 years old. I knew I was inexperienced for the role. The church had about 700 people attending Allison Park Church on the weekends, and I knew I was inexperienced. I was learning everything, and somewhere in the journey, I started getting criticized by people, because leaders get criticized regardless. If everything about your organization is flawless and it's rolling along, you will still receive criticism. Right. Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt through the Red Sea into the promised land, almost, all the way through the wilderness, and he got criticized. Right? Yeah. You would think that after parting the Red Sea, you would be like he is now never going to be criticized by anybody. I mean, Moses could look back and say, well, what Red Sea have you parted? When did you draw water from a rock?
Right.
But Moses was criticized. Okay, so I started receiving criticism as a young pastor. It was devastating to me because I took everything that was being said as if it was potentially 100% correct. And in most cases, criticism might be, 90% wrong and 10% correct. People have agendas. They're trying to manipulate you. They're offended at somebody else. They're speaking about a hurt they've experienced in the past. They're seeing it through certain lenses. But I would go and I would reevaluate everything about my life and everything about my leadership, and it would take me out of my game for 3 or 4 days, and I would have to process through it all and pray through it all until finally I got back up on my feet and I would be able to move forward. And then the next wave of criticism would come, and it just really devastated me. And then the more I was criticized and the more I learned how to filter it properly, the less it affected me. So that now, 32 years later, I'm still criticized just as much as I was then, but I'm able to pick out the truth from the distortion a little quicker. And some things I recognize I just can't change. Like I know this is my personality. I know these are my gifts. And while you may have just pointed out the fact that I have weaknesses, I'm okay with those now. Like it doesn't send me into a tailspin like it once did. So I think there is the need to grow into yourself a little bit to be able to receive criticism properly. But one of the things to realize is that not everything that comes your way is actually true, but most criticism has an element of truth in it. And if you ignore it completely, if you let it completely destroy you, then you won't grow. And if you ignore it as if there's no truth in it at all, then you won't grow. And that's what makes this particular thing so difficult.
Yeah. And I think a lot of pastors and leaders get to a place in their life, especially as you move on through your career, where very few people have the opportunity to really call you out for anything. It's like the room, as you elevate, the room of people that can actually speak to you is smaller and smaller and smaller. And sometimes even if you don't, climb any kind of corporate ladder, it still decreases.
Well, isn't that like, I haven't found that to be true. I get criticized from probably more different angles now than I had when I first started.
I'm talking about who you receive it from, though.
Oh, okay. So you're saying
so initially
there is a tendency for leaders as they rise in effectiveness and power to shut off their ears to criticism that might come from the grassroots.
Because so much of it is unhelpful. It's not going to trigger growth in you personally.
And a lot of times the really high-powered people surround themselves with people who are going to say, yes,
exactly.
You're amazing, you're great, oh, I love you.
Right.
Wow, that was so anointing, so that you don't ever hear the hard and difficult truths.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do this. Why don't we start off with, we'll talk about, I know these are going to bleed over into each other, but we'll start off the conversation about taking and receiving, receiving or taking, same thing, criticism, and then we'll talk about giving criticism. And then I want to talk about how we can do a better job of living in truth and allowing things about ourselves to be exposed even when the price is higher than we want it to be. Okay? Let's start with receiving criticism. So you just talked about your personal journey and how you went from like, wow, whatever they're saying must be very true, and I'm a horrible leader, and it'd be so much better if there was another person than me doing this, because like if I'm that bad, like
maybe I should just quit.
Yeah, this guy off the street probably is better than me. Like I should probably just quit.
Or maybe I should change everything about the way that I'm doing this now because everything I've been doing is wrong, and maybe they're right, and I need to change the whole plan around. Yeah. So it is a vicious cycle of self-analysis that you can get into when you've been criticized. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
receiving
what's the
criticism.
question?
So give me some of your principles. Like
let me give you some Proverbs.
Yeah.
Proverbs 12, verse 1, NIV, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid. I love that one because the Bible has the word stupid in there. So first, I have to love correction. That's the first thing. I got to be I love to be. So one way we start the process is to find people in our life that we're submitted to, that we trust, that we know have our best interest in mind, and to use them both as a place to bounce ideas. So if we have somebody that's come at us and we're not sure we're seeing it in the proper way, to take what has a failure of ours or a criticism that we received to a trusted mentor in our lives and say, help me see this properly. What about this is something I need to pay attention to? And what about this is just, their emotions or their frustrations? And can you help me see that? And then what would you say into my life? Like, there should be people who speak into your life on a regular basis, both mentors and friends. I don't know who said this. I think someone related to the Ark, Greg Surratt, Chris Hodges, Dino Rizzo, one of those guys. You need to be in relationship with people who love you deeply and are not impressed by who you are.
Yeah.
Right? So that they can speak into your life appropriately. Okay, so that's one thing. I think you have to love correction. Here's another one, Proverbs 27:6. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. So having a friend that can wound you by their word because they've said something that's true or helped you filter through something that you have experienced to pull the truth out of it, I think is a part of how we receive things well. But I would also say that even whenever you're getting something from an enemy, almost always there's a percentage of what's being said that's true that should be paid attention to. And sometimes you can look at the source of someone that's saying something to you and almost think, well, because of who they are, everything they just said is invalid. But there's almost always something you can take away where they say, eat the meat and spit out the bones.
Yeah, right.
There's always something you can take away that is going to be a factor for you to pay attention to. So I think having a filter of people around you that you want to receive correction from is helpful to help you for you to get a good perspective on what's being said.
So can I filter what you said?
Yeah.
Somebody criticizes you. One thing you do, you didn't actually say this part, but I'm assuming this is there. You respond kindly.
Yeah. Without
starting a fight or lashing back out. And then you take what they told you and you use somebody else to help filter, use somebody else to help filter what they're saying.
Yeah. So when someone comes at me with something, I will smile and I say, okay, well, I received that. I'm not sure what I think about that in a moment. I might have to get back to you. What you said kind of stings a little bit, but I really want to grow as a person. I want to grow as a leader. So thank you. I appreciate this. I'm always open to criticism. I never want you to feel like you can't come to me. I smile. And then if I might say, I'm going to get back to you on this, I need to process this a little bit. And then if you need to have a reaction to what you just heard, you do that in a safe place with someone who is a safe person in your life, where then you go and you're like, who do they think they are? I can't believe they just said this about me. They're just crazy. Let me tell you what else they did. And then after you calm down, they may say, all right, so let's talk about what they said and how you're going to get back to them and what maybe you can take out of this conversation, right? Yeah. And so, I think you're gracious to the critic. Then you use a mentor or a good friend that you trust as a filter. Then you take that before the Lord and you process that, and then you pull out what you can learn from it and throw the rest away. Now, the throw the rest away is very important because the devil can use things that other people said about you, even though you know it's not true, as a weapon in your mind. And I think Mark Batterson said something like, never let the arrows of criticism hit your heart until they have gone through the filter of God's grace.
Yeah.
So don't give people the right to stab you in the heart for no reason. And don't let the devil take their words and use that as a dagger in your heart. However, take the wounds that you need to take so that you can grow as a person and not avoid facing the difficult truths about your character or your leadership.
Okay. And underpinning this whole conversation, we won't focus on this a lot because I want to get into this in the second half. But underpinning this is this assumption: without criticism, you can't really grow, because without criticism, you can't walk in truth. If we're imperfect, then there are things that we need corrected on, regardless of how it comes to us, how that truth comes to us.
Yeah, maybe I broaden that.
Okay, go ahead.
Say, the Holy Spirit does something called conviction.
Sure.
It's not really criticism, but he makes us aware of things that need
Right.
to change. And then, so sometimes life comes at us, and it comes at us in the form of discipline, like we experience consequences of our lack of character or lack of wisdom or whatever. And that has a way of bringing correction in our lives. And then criticism is a part of that.
Okay,
Right. So
there's
I wouldn't
more
say
than
it's
just
not it's
that.
not all going to come from other people pointing it out.
Right.
It can come from the Holy Spirit convicting you, or from the natural correction of experiencing the consequences of your own flaws and weaknesses and stupidities.
Mm-hmm.
But then what's great is if before you experience the consequences of your own weakness or stupidity, if somebody in love says, by the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but this is something, like a person who is mentoring us will criticize us so that we are prevented from experiencing consequences.
Yeah.
So they're really trying to help us to change before the impact
Right.
that comes in the world from actions that we take. Not everybody that criticizes us does it for our benefit. That's what makes it kind of confusing.
Okay.
Some
And-
people criticize just because they're mad.
Right.
You know.
But okay, we'll save a lot of this, but I'm just saying, I think that's a better perspective as far as the breadth of the ways we can change. But I think sometimes, while accepting criticism is painful, the most painful way, I heard one of my mentors say recently, some people just have to get hit by a train to learn. Like, it's like they will never hear it until all of a sudden life just...
Even then, some people don't.
Yeah.
Right? They have to hit by 3 or 4 trains. You know, and then, like you say, you got to hit bottom before, and then sometimes you look at someone's life and that you say, well, certainly they hit bottom there. And then they find a way to burrow down to another level.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, actually, this is one of the principles of the recovery movement, right? Nothing changes until you admit that you need to change. So the first of the 12 steps, we admitted that we were powerless and that our lives had become unmanageable. So the very first step towards change with any kind of addictive pattern that can become a blind spot in your life is to admit that you've got an issue.
Yep.
Right. And so I think change in and of itself, growth in and of itself, requires for us to identify what's wrong.
Yeah.
And if we're too proud or insecure or blinded by, I don't know what, narcissism,
We'll get there.
Then you can never really grow. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. All right. And then let's talk about giving criticism for a second. We don't have to spend an eternity here, but I think that you probably have two sides. I would say the much larger side is people that don't know when or how to give criticism, so you typically avoid it. It's like, I know they need to hear this, but this person's never going to listen to me. So this is a battle I'm not going to pick. And so nobody ever says important things to somebody that needs to hear them. Or I guess then there's the other side, which is probably more minority, but they say everything.
Yeah.
You know, even if you shouldn't say it, like, it's just, this is the truth, or there's some truth in
So
this.
it's like, a lot of people are like this. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything. And we start to collect offenses. So some of it is we collect observations about somebody's weaknesses. And then another point, we collect offenses. And then we're like, not going to say it, not going to say it, not going to say it. And then all of a sudden when we say it, it's like we roll out the scroll.
Yeah.
Wow, now I'm going to give it to you.
It's a mixture of offense and observation.
It is. And so then they machine gun you. And you're left like,
and they're burning the bridge down.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Where is this coming from? Oh my goodness. I thought you were smiling a minute ago. Right. Okay. So it's like that's one bad thing. But the very first, so if you wanted to deal with how to criticize, you have to do it for the person's benefit. So I always say it's like the Oreo cookie approach, right? It's the two cookies and the cream in the middle, right? So it is, say 5 positive things on the front end, say one thing that is really concise and clear about what you think needs to change, then say 5 positive things on the back end, and then say nothing else and let the person react. I think that's the way that criticism has to happen. So I'll just say, let's take it into the most vulnerable place where criticism conversations can happen. Let's talk about marriage, okay? Mm-hmm. So I know, so the last vacation that Mel and I took, we took some time while we were away to evaluate our relationship and to see how it could improve. And I asked the question, what could I do better as a husband? And then she asked the question, what can I do better as a wife? Mm-hmm. And that is dangerous territory right there when someone says to you, especially someone you're married to, how can I improve? Because the way that you say that can become a real sore point and sticking point for a long time. So I use those the 5 positive things. And then if I could say one thing to you, it would be this. But let me just put that in context now, and let me say 5 positive things on the back end. And that was done with plenty of time, plenty of space, not a lot of competing noise, chance for us to concentrate, an opportunity for us to talk about it for several hours if we needed to. Yeah, right. And it ended up being a really good conversation for both of us on both ends, and it made our marriage better because we spoke the truth in love and were able to make adjustments, and we grew together in that relationship. So I think that's the best case scenario. Mm-hmm. The worst case scenario is we say things without the positives on the front and the back end. It sticks like a dagger in our spouse's heart. And then they react back and say a few things about our weaknesses. And next thing you know, we're in what Gary Smalley used to call the crazy dance.
Yeah, crazy cycle.
Yeah.
I've done plenty of those.
Yeah, well, so have I. Anybody who's married can probably talk about those moments, right? And so sometimes it's the hardest to receive the criticisms from the people that we are closest to, because those criticisms carry so much weight with them.
Yeah, absolutely. The best book I ever read on this, I was trying to log in and I can't figure it out on my phone right now. You read Crucial Conversations?
No.
It's a phenomenal book.
By the way, I think this is one of the things that comes out of our podcast. I've actually had multiple people say to me, you recommended a book on your podcast, and you especially, Dave, have done a good job of bringing those sources to the table. So tell me about that.
Yeah, it's been about 1.5 years since I've read it. It's called Crucial Conversation. It's by Crucial Conversations. It's by a number of authors. I remember Carrie Patterson's one of them. It is probably the best book on conflict resolution I've ever read. It talks about, so there is, the Oreo cookie, but they have some more nuances on how to approach. I think the premise of the book is there are some things we all assume, well, you can't say that to them. But there are some people that are the best in the world at this, and they can say anything, and people rely on them to say everything, but they do it in a way where it actually gains them relational influence. Like they're the person that everybody sees as like the source of truth for them, but it's done in a way that's not cutting. It talks about how to defuse explosive situations and how to be like your boss's best friend, where you earn trust by saying the things that nobody else wants to say. Phenomenal book. I would highly recommend it if you want to read more about giving criticism.
Crucial Conversations.
Yeah.
Okay.
You should read it too.
I definitely will.
It's so good. Our staff actually did a study on it maybe last year sometime.
The Northside campus.
Yeah, Northside campus staff. Cool. We read through a lot of it together. Because it's just one of those things, if you're a pastor or a leader of an organization, you end up in those situations so often.
Oh, yeah.
Even when you don't want to be in them.
Let's face it, you can't disciple somebody without confronting.
Yeah.
And you can't grow leaders without confronting. And you'll never reach a place of excellence without receiving input. Like somebody has to tell you, no, that's wrong. Don't do it. Do it that way. Do it this way. This is better. So you can't really, and becoming a great husband or father or wife or mother or, young person or leader, you have to receive it and you have to give it. It's part of the journey. Mm. We would love to live in a world where no one was ever offended, no one was ever weak, and no one ever said anything difficult. But that's a delusional world. And what you're talking about in the second part of this conversation, Dave, is why we should long to live in truth.
Absolutely.
And why we don't want to live in blind spots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that I've been doing a little bit of writing on. I can't promise anything will get finished, but I've been writing a little bit about this just because I'm really curious.
I thought
about
we
this.
weren't talking about that. You
Yeah,
said don't say.
You said don't say it. But I'm like, I have a whole. If you're looking at the video, I have a whole bunch of notes on my phone because something that I've been really like looking into.
So it's a book concept potential.
Yeah. I don't know exactly where it is, but one of the things that as I was doing my research for this that stood out to me, Proverbs 16:2 says, "All a man's ways seem right to him, but the Lord evaluates the motives."
Yeah.
That's one that I feel like I have experienced for me, and I've watched a lot of other people live it. Or it's like, well, of course I'm doing this the right way. But the reality that I am trying to live out in my life is if I want to become the most like Jesus that I can be, I have to be willing to pay the price that truth requires, which is sometimes dying to yourself, sometimes it's hearing that you're wrong. Sometimes it means apologizing. There's all kinds of things like that. So yeah, I mean, I guess have you? I'm not sure how to ask this question. The second part of this conversation we'll talk about how to walk in truth, right? How to remove blind spots, how to walk in truth. Some of that is obviously accepting criticism. We've done a little bit on that now, I guess, but. What are some of what are in your opinion, in your experience, what are the most prominent reasons you've seen as to why you or other people would maybe think you should live in truth and want to live in truth, but would avoid doing that altogether?
Well, it's like we're saying, it's because of the uncomfortability of confronting truth. It's uncomfortable, right? Okay, so let's go to churches. Many churches don't want to live in truth. Here's what I mean. So someone is a part of the worship team who can't sing. Everybody in the congregation knows they can't sing. They don't know that. The pastor knows it. The people who listen to them know it. Week after week and after week, they get up on a microphone and they sing out of tune. Why do we let that continue? Well, because we love that person and we don't want them to feel embarrassed. And so we tolerate lack of excellence because we don't want to have that difficult conversation with somebody to say, look, I think you're placed in the wrong role. You need to be doing something different than singing because singing isn't your gift. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's just a really obvious. So what happens as a result of if we foster the delusion, well, then a whole congregation lives with bad music every week, which may be a deterrent to new people joining the church and may turn people off that need Jesus. I mean, it's everything has consequences and everything has unpleasantries. It's really just a matter of which ones you want to live with. Mm-hmm. So the thought to I can live in this delusion and don't have to face the truth and it won't be uncomfortable. Well, that's not really true. You're just choosing your pain.
I actually would say though, I think a lot of times we're unaware. It's not I am choosing to live in a delusion. I think sometimes it's just that we've built something around, like there's a structure or a worldview or a framework of thinking about ourselves and other people that makes it hard to even be aware that there even could be a delusion.
Yeah, okay. Well, sometimes it is purposeful.
Sometimes it's purposeful.
Sometimes it's like, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to do anything because this makes me uncomfortable to have to change. But sometimes it is true. Okay, but let's. This is not an encouraging thought. I guess it is in one way. So if we're going to stand ourselves and measure ourselves against the character of Christ, look, Jeff Leake, Jesus Christ, you're going to measure the two.
Yeah.
I am so far away from Jesus.
Yeah.
If I look at every aspect of how far I am away from Jesus now, all at the same time, comprehensively, I'm gonna want to crawl in a hole somewhere.
Yeah. Right.
So one of the things I think that we needed to realize is that God selectively reveals things we don't see. Mm-hmm. A little bit at a time so that we can address what we need to address in our character flaws one at a time and we're not overrun. So some of this is actually a gift from God that we don't see it all at once. I mean, who would want to see that?
True.
Right? And so some of it is you're just not ready to see it all. Like there are layers of improvement that you need to go through, and God starts with the parts that are the low-hanging fruit, the easiest to see. So the structures of coping mechanisms that we use so that we don't collapse on ourselves by seeing our weaknesses and flaws is, I think, a part of the journey.
Yeah. Can I go back to what you were talking about choosing to live in a delusion? So I think I heard somebody else quote Sam Chand on this, so I'm not quoting him. I'm quoting somebody else with their paraphrase.
So it's an ultimate, the paraphrase.
Right. But he said something to the effect of anybody can become self-aware, but the hard part is moving on that self-awareness. Like you accept and realize the truth about yourself. The change part is maybe even harder than accepting that truth.
Yeah, because you have to see it. What does James say? The person who looks at the law that gives life and liberty and then goes away and does nothing about it is like a person who looks in the mirror and sees that they have a bad hair day, but they don't fix what's broken, right? Mm-hmm. So just seeing it once is not enough. You got to actually come back to it and face it consistently over and over and over and live in the reality of what you're seeing, so that you can make the adjustments that you need to make.
So here's what my proposition is. I think that the actual act of becoming self-aware, like changing is probably the hardest, but I think that most of us don't choose to live in a delusion about ourselves. I think most of us choose other things that then lead us to that place. Okay. So here's an example. I really wish I had written this down, but I've read a number of times in different books about it's an implicit bias that all of us have to do with motives. So it's this idea that if we're late, well, it's just context. I mean, man, I have a baby at home and they're freaking out, and like you just don't understand. Like I was only 2 minutes and I'm doing my absolute best, but if somebody else is late, they're so sloppy, they're insensitive. How can they live with themselves like this? Like everybody else knows them about this, but it's like we tend to give ourselves credit for the context we know about for ourselves, but we assume it's a character flaw for someone else. For us, it's context. For them, it's character. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes it is context, but one thing that I think can cause us to be a little bit blind is to ignore that any part of it is character. It's like because something is not going well for us, and it's always, well, they just triggered me, and so I blew up on them. And it's not, but maybe I'm also an angry person. Like if we saw somebody do what we just did without our context.
It's probably always both, right? Some of it is context, some of it is character.
Right.
It's probably always a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And when you're being criticized, you should think like that. Some of this is context. It's where they're coming from. It's what they've gone through. It's what they're feeling right now. It's what I'm experiencing. But then there's also a component of this that has to be faced. Yeah. And having the gift to know what to pull out as a truth-based character improvement issue and what to dismiss as a context or personal dispositional thing that comes from someone who's criticizing you. That's a real gift.
Yeah, right, true. Yeah, so one barrier I've noticed is attributing anything that is wrong with our behavior or most things to context. Because then I think the other flip side
we also call that making excuses.
Yeah, it's making excuses. It's making excuses. It's not a character thing. It's just what happened in my situation. And I think the flip side is because we're not always good at accepting criticism, it's like, well, then if that's true, then I'm a horrible pastor.
We overreact.
I'm a horrible mom. I'm a horrible friend. Like
which is another defense mechanism.
It is.
Because then if there's a reason for it, then you don't have to deal with it. If it's irreparable damage because you're screwed up way beyond human belief, then what can you do? It's impossible. Mm-hmm. Might as well just indulge yourself even more. Living in the in-between.
Or then you ignore it. Because it's like, well, I can't live with myself if that's true. Yeah. No, you're still a great pastor. You just
got a weakness.
Sometimes you're a jerk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So the degree to which you're willing to face consistently the flaws that you see in your life is the speed to which you will grow as a person and as a leader.
Absolutely.
And if you are facing your own hard truths, dealing with them to the best of your ability, with the grace of God in your life, you will grow. You will go quickly. And as you grow, it will be impressive to others and they'll want to do the same. And actually, you facing your own flaws with a good perspective and dealing with yourself in grace makes it easier for you to mentor others.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Well, I think the best mentors are people that have a level of humility and are accepting of criticism and of their own blind spots from people that are beneath them.
Because then they can say, hey, look, what I'm telling you now is something I had to deal with.
Yeah.
right? And I had to face this unpleasant truth that this was true about me, but this doesn't mean that I was a terrible person. Like I know that I've grown through this, and you can grow too. Like what I'm saying to you is not the end for you; it's the beginning of something. Because I believe in you, and you have chances to fail. You don't have to be perfect. Like that tone is actually the tone we have to take with ourselves. Very few people can do that for themselves.
Yes, yes.
God does this for us.
Yeah.
Right? He has the most tender father in the universe in the way that he brings correction into our life. But we oftentimes are either way too easy or way too hard on ourselves.
And I'll throw one more thing out there that I've been thinking about. I think maybe this is just one of the excuses, but I think another thing that can stop us where we sort of live in blindness is we confuse like personal growth with just we're doing something hard. Like, well, what I'm doing is growing. Or like, man, I face so much discomfort every day. But it's like, yeah, but this is a huge pattern for you. Like, you're a great leader. You're kicking some butt, but like, come on now.
Yeah, this is the fly in the ointment.
This is the fly in the ointment. And if you could just get rid of this, imagine what could happen with your life.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to accept because it's like, well, then like, does that mean I'm a failure? No, you're a phenomenal leader.
So let's talk generationally. Do you think that this is especially more difficult for those who are younger than my generation, or are you better at this? Because like your generation loves the personality test, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram. Sure. So is your generation better at facing hard truths or worse? Or is it better or worse?
This is my opinion.
Okay.
I think we're equally the same. My opinion my generation's probably just a little more smug about self-awareness. But I think this though. No,
we got to explain that. What do you mean?
I think my generation is very concerned with being tuned with what's my personality. We're all individualists. What makes me different? How do I tick? What gives me energy? What do I like to do? Therefore, I should be in this career path, or I want these friends, or I express myself in this taste of music, or I work best in these environments. That's all a degree of self-awareness. But I think in terms of how aware are we of our character flaws, it's probably similar. But the caveat I'll throw in there is, I think it seems to me that as you get further in leadership and as you get older in age, people stop as lifelong learners. Like everybody says they want to be a lifelong learner until being a lifelong learner.
So whereas maybe my generation and generations older than me would mask their blind spots in a suit and tie and authoritative positional leadership, and you can't talk to me because you're not on a level with me. Maybe the younger generation blinds themselves because they keep blaming their environment. Maybe if I was just in a different workplace or doing a different job or then
it's a little more like they would point out I am self-aware and they would point out some truths, but then you miss the other ones, and then it's easier for my generation to reject truth when truth is personalized. But I feel like, but this is valid. You're telling me my feelings are invalid. Well, your feelings might not be valid, or it might be valid, but you might still be wrong. Like we can have valid feelings and also be wrong.
Right.
And sometimes that distinction gets lost. So somebody says something.
And if you have that, then you'll never grow.
Yeah, somebody says something that's offensive, and we're like, they're acting like I don't know myself. Like, I'm self-aware. Like, look at these things I know. And it's like, yeah, but there's truth there. I do think probably the older generations are like, who is that person to talk to me?
Yeah.
Like, they have a hidden agenda. They're not even as successful as I am. They haven't worked as hard as I do. Look at their personal habits. And so we invalidate the person because they're not as disciplined or as successful. My generation probably does. It's all different forms of smoke screens. But I think ultimately, like, we all have to decide, like, do I want to grow? Do I want to become more like Jesus? Do I want to continually learn and become the best that I can be? Or am I content with where I am, which I know is easier, but I think we're just stopping short of what God could do through us if we continue to go through the painful journey of being sharpened. I mean, it's like what Proverbs says, where iron sharpens iron. And for me, sharpening has never been painless.
Well, it's not painless for anybody.
Yeah.
So what do we do? Let me turn the tables on. What's action steps coming out of this talk? So I want to learn to receive criticism better. I want to learn to criticize better. give constructive criticism. I want to grow as a person. What would you say as takeaways?
I think for me, one of the takeaways for me is I need to have someone in my life, and I have a few people like this, but I need to have a few people in my life that I have given permission and like really worked with them on permission for them to tell me what nobody else wants to say. Like, are there some things about my life that like probably somebody needs to tell me, but nobody really wants to tell me because I think I'm going to react badly?
Yeah.
That's a hard question to ask.
So there are friends that we all have that are always going to take our side. Mm-hmm. And we need friends like that. They're like, they're wrong. I love you. Take care of yourself. Go have a milkshake, right? Kind of a thing. And then there are other friends that we need to have that are like, no, they're right about this. Like, yeah, have a milkshake and everything, but you need to deal with this because this is actually a truth. Everything else they said was a bunch of baloney, right? But this one thing here, you probably should pay attention
Actually,
to.
I think that the least painful way to get criticism is whenever you go asking for it, where you're like, it's more feedback.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, is there anything in my life right now that, what's that quote? It talks about how like everybody's willing to say the 90%, but often that last 10% is the most.
Yeah. So that in a confrontation, I think Pastor Bill Hybels used to talk about this, that in a confrontational conversation, a lot of times we would say the 90%. That is the easiest part of the big rock, that we're trying to describe, the big glacier. But we don't tell the other 10%, like the hardest piece of this. So if you're going to confront it all, get it all on the table. Not like a machine gun, here's 19 things, but that one cream in the Oreo cookie, that one thing, tell the full expression of it so that you don't walk away. Because here's what will happen. If you don't tell the final 10%, you're going to have this conversation again.
Mm-hmm. And they're not going to be able to, like, it's usually that last 10% that's the most useful and the most changing. And so I think, like, hey, tell it to
don't
us
be
and
nice.
close friend. Yeah,
be kind.
Can you help me? Like,
be truthful.
It would really help me.
Yeah.
If you can maybe tell me some things that maybe not like, not like, I mean, if there's personal stuff we need to work out, great. But just for me, is there any truth that I need to hear that nobody else has been willing to tell me?
Okay, so find somebody in your life that gives you the unfiltered truth that you really, really, really trust. That's step one. What else?
Step two is, I think, prepare yourself for how you're going to respond to criticism when it does come.
Okay.
Otherwise, we just react. I think we need to have sort of a policy or a
plan.
principle.
Yep.
Yeah, this is how I react when I'm criticized.
Okay. And what else?
Step three, I think, learn how to be truthful with others. You can read crucial
read the
conversation.
book. Yeah, read the book. Practice. By the way, confrontation only gets easier with practice. Mm-hmm. Some people get up in the morning and they're just ready to confront the next thing, but most of us hate it. And the only way you get more comfortable with it is to do it regularly.
Yeah.
I used to always, as a young leader, put off confrontation to the right moment. Now I realize the sooner the better.
Yeah.
As soon as you see it, probably needs to be said. Don't put it off. Don't wait, because there will be more things that will grow up in the meantime.
Yeah. And then I guess my last thing that I'd be thinking of, I read Proverbs 16, which says, all a man's ways seem right to him, but the Lord evaluates motives. And I think, isn't it Psalm 19 that says, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. I think the last thing has to just be a prayer, like, God, would you help expose my impure motives? Because you could do the right thing for the wrong reasons or the wrong attitude. Like, would you help to take even the deepest parts of me that are dark or that I'm blind to, and would you bring those things to the light so that I can be more like Jesus?
Wow, it's a dangerous prayer.
Yeah.
It's a good prayer.
But a necessary prayer.
Yeah. It's not like he's not going to do it anyway. Because he loves you, and he's a father that the Bible says if you don't get disciplined by your heavenly Father, then you're not really a true child of God. It's going to bring it to the surface anyway. You might as well partner with him, because he's committed to making you like Jesus, whether you're going to go kicking and screaming or willingly. Mm-hmm. And so it's much better to say, God, I really want to learn. And I know you love me no matter what, and I'm secure in your love. And even if I find out that I am flawed in a way that I didn't know before, by your grace, you want me to change and grow. And so you're exposing all of this just because you're trying to make me better than I was. And you're trying to help me get rid of the stuff that's dead weight in my life. Yeah. And you can get there. Jesus believes in you, and we believe in you. And so keep going. Keep on your journey.
That's good. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts?
No, I think this was a really good episode. I would just say, now go practice this.
Yeah.
Don't let this episode just be something you heard. Try to have a conversation with someone somewhere about something that will help you grow.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, we appreciate, once again, you being a part of this episode. Hopefully this was helpful to you. And, don't passively aggressively share this with somebody that's got a blind spot. But if you want to share this with people in a helpful, friendly way, it would also help us as well to get the word out and to help to share this resource. You can do that in the ways we listed earlier. You can share this, you can like and subscribe, you can leave us a review. Any of that would be super appreciated. So once again, as always, thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys next episode.